Good afternoon, and welcome to Conversations, a production of the Oakville Chamber of Commerce. My name is Tim Caddigan. I'm the chair of the Oakville Chamber of Commerce, and it is my pleasure to host our weekly conversation series. On today's episode, we are pleased to be joined by Dr. Janet Morrison of Sheridan College. Dr. Morrison was named Sheridan's 8th president and vice chancellor on June 11, 2018. She had previously assumed the role of provost and vice president academic at Sheridan in 2016. And prior to her appointment at Sheridan, Janet spent 17 years at York University working in various roles focused on learning, discovery, and engagement, most recently serving as vice provost students. I always enjoy the opportunity to speak with Dr. Morrison, so I was quite thrilled we were able to schedule her as our guest for this afternoon's program. Dr. Morrison, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
To say the pandemic has been disruptive is an understatement, obviously, but certainly at post-secondary institutions, the impact on so many lives is unique. What has the experience been like for you and your team at Sheridan?
Wow. Well, that's a good starting point. If I go back 10 weeks, certainly the most obvious piece of that puzzle was the announcement by the province that K-12 would be suspended in light of the pandemic and the effort to flatten the curve. I think post-secondary responded quickly and decisively. And what the country saw across all of its systems was a coordinated effort to move to alternate delivery. And, there's lots of language about online delivery, but really it was alternate delivery, and it was done on an emergency basis. So, we at Sheridan are quite proud of the pivot that was facilitated over a very short period. So, within 5 days, we moved over 3,000 courses to alternate delivery. That just simply wouldn't have been possible without the amazing support and generosity, frankly, of our students. But I maintain that Sheridan's faculty are the best in the business, and they successfully moved us. They moved mountains in a period of just under a week. So that was kind of March. The next piece of the transition was recognizing, not just the personal, the professional, the academic, but also the financial hardship on students, particularly those who were subject to a loss of employment income. And so in successive weeks, Sheridan moved to try and be responsive on that front to ensuring students had access to emergency monies while some of the federal and provincial support programs were organized. And then, of course, we've been actively engaged with our communities in trying to serve not just as a hub, but as a provider of expertise and support on things like PPE production. So busy times, always with students, our faculty, our staff, and our community partners at the forefront.
It's incredible how many different situations you must have been faced with, and you've touched on some. Obviously, my mind went right away to the student who's trying to finish their program, and maybe they only need a few credits in order to do so, but also students contemplating perhaps their move home, whether they're from Canada or maybe internationally, and they've had to grapple with accommodation issues and travel restrictions, and as you talked about, alternate learning methods. Can you walk us through some of those situations that you've been dealing with, some more specific ones?
Yeah, so alternate delivery looks and feels and is experienced by learners in very different ways, depending on their learner profile. So a key to us moving so quickly, successfully, has really been to augment what's happening in our curricular spaces, what we teach, to be paralleled by how we're teaching and the support services that we offer. So it wasn't just those 3,000 courses that had to pivot really quickly. It was our support services, and huge kudos to our staff across all 3 of our campuses. We support a total of about 41,000 learners, both full and part-time, over 8,000 of those at the Oakville campus. And all of those learners had particular needs and challenges, to be frank. So the example that you might have given, we have 2 residence buildings on the Trafalgar campus. In very close concert with public health officials and drawing on the guidance of expertise, we really look to try and figure out what the safest alternatives for those students are. So where students could go home, they were encouraged to do so, and we facilitated both travel plans and in some instances financial assistance to make that happen. That doesn't mean our buildings are empty. They're consolidated, and we think we're providing housing in a safe way that facilitates social distancing. But the plans, the personal plans, are as many in number almost as the number of students and learners that we support, recognizing that it's not just our students that are experiencing this. Again, the personal, the professional, and the financial hardship that has come with this is also impacting the over 3,800 employees that Sheridan is accountable to, again, across Oakville, Mississauga, and Brampton.
Well, it's a credit to you and your team for the level of preparation, given just how many stakeholders, 41,000 students. I didn't even know the population. So kudos to you for being prepared for that. And you and I talked the other day, and you touched on your strategic plan and how that actually prepared you in many ways for what we're facing now.
Right. Yeah. So, what the notion of preparedness is such an interesting one, because I don't know of anybody personally, professionally, academically, who could have been prepared for this. What I will say, and I'll couch it in the context of being relatively new to Sheridan, is that ours is a learning community that really embraces innovation. And so, we have a very well-earned reputation for trailblazing. We have a comfort level with innovation, entrepreneurship. And I can't imagine being better positioned to respond to the challenge and pivot essentially on a dime. What our strategic plan really articulated when it was announced just over a year ago was that the world was really going to intensify relative to its volatility, its uncertainty, the complexity, the ambiguity. So this notion of a VUCA world was really our new reality, where change is the only constant. And we've been talking a lot, faculty, staff, and students, about what it means to be prepared for that increasingly complex world, how you, in essence, galvanize learners and educators to function in that space. So I think those preemptive conversations were really important. It afforded us a bit of a crystal ball, but all of us are struggling, and the imperative to try and figure out how to balance the immense challenge that we've been presented with appropriate, purposeful, targeted, sometimes personalized supports has been difficult. And yet I think our success, to your point, is really a credit to the people that call Sheridan home. It's an amazing, amazing place.
We just recently heard the unemployment numbers across the country, and they're staggering.
Yep.
What's even more worrying is that we're now starting to see businesses shuttering for good. And those, some of those that are unemployed, they'll have nothing to go back to as we come out of the pandemic. You just said the word, confusion, and I forget the word you used actually.
Yeah.
But what would you say to those people who now find themselves lost with the employer that they had no longer there to go back to, and their world has been turned upside down?
Yeah. So Sheridan has been approaching the pandemic through the lens of principles. And one of our principles is to plan in the spirit of community, so that we're all in this together and we'll navigate it together. But also in a spirit of kindness and compassion, empathy, generosity. And I think, first and foremost, the level of empathy for the amount of disruption, the financial hardship that people, communities, families are experiencing is immense. We see and hear, students write to me about that every day. I had dinner with students last night. I had a virtual dinner with students. I'm doing coffee chats with faculty members. And they talk to me a lot about what this means for them. Where we find some semblance, I think, there's so much that's unknown. People are looking for some certainty in the context of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. And where we're finding some sense of sustainability and security is in the notion of a future forward lens. So what do we think the skills or the competencies that are going to be required for individuals to navigate change effectively? But also what's the mindset? So, we at Sheridan talk a lot about entrepreneurship, innovation. How do you cultivate that, again, both on a personal level and then organizationally? And one of the ways that Sheridan can do that with small, medium-sized businesses is through the support it offers to startups and scale-ups. So we actively work on applied research projects or through our entrepreneurship center called EDGE with some of those companies to retool, to provide some of the R&D support that is otherwise really difficult to access. So, on the one hand, huge empathy for the challenges that people are facing. I think Sheridan's obligation, we remain committed to being a community hub and a source of expertise and resourcing. And I think the way we're demonstrating that is the provision of talent that's positioned to function in this complex world, but also through our applied research agenda and the support that we offer in particular for small, medium enterprise.
We spoke last week with the chief economist at the Canadian Chamber, and what he talked about was how for many people, employment will change as we come out of the pandemic. So the job that they had may be retooled, it may be different. How do you even contemplate what you will need to be in the years or years ahead to help serve that need?
Yeah, well, you kind of hope that your crystal ball is working in these moments, right? I think this conversation for me is kind of bifurcated. So on the one hand, we know that there are some disciplines, some academic disciplines, some credentials, areas of expertise that are going to be increasingly in demand. And I'd use as examples healthcare, change leadership, anything relative to technology. We know that across the STEM offerings, for example, science, technology, engineering, and math, we know that those are in-demand, concretized skills that we don't see, relenting anytime soon. Where we spend a tremendous amount of time now, though, is on the parallel competencies. So you could be an incredibly skilled tradesperson, for example, across our skilled trades offerings. But do you have the capacity to pivot, to adapt, to manage change? Are you resilient? And so as part of our strategic planning process, but just inherent in Sheridan's DNA, we talk a lot about competencies. So what are those things, abilities, behavioral attributes that successful humans, good citizens need to function in complexity? And so things like resilience, being entrepreneurial, do you know yourself well? Can you market yourself? Can you adapt? What are your interpersonal skills? Can you communicate effectively? Can you work in a group, in a team? How do you navigate conflict and differences in opinion? And so we really feel like Sheridan fills that niche across all of our 5 faculties. Including, for example, our School of Business, where we teach actively creativity and creative problem solving.
If you've just joined us, you're watching Conversations. It's a presentation of the Oakville Chamber of Commerce, and our guest today is Dr. Janet Morrison, President and Vice Chancellor of Sheridan. Janet, we touched on education and the individual. How can Sheridan help local business owners now and in the future? I'm thinking corporate training, retraining, upskilling. It goes back to that last question around, what will the new student need, or what will students need as they make their pivot?
Right. Yeah. So great question, and one that we spend a lot of time contemplating. Sheridan's Vice President, External Relations, Jeff Valentin, and many of our subject matter experts are out doing community outreach and maintaining our networks throughout this disruption. 3 pieces of the puzzle. So the first is that we hear from businesses all the time that there are talent needs. And we engage professional advisory committees across all of our programs where industry and community organization leaders are engaged and tapped for their expertise and their input. So we try to be as responsive. We're actually very nimble as an organization. And so we provide talent that is uniquely positioned to meet the challenges of industry and our community partners. So talent is a big one. The second piece is our applied research capacity. So our Center for Elder Care Research, for example, in Oakville, is engaged on a number of research projects with community partners, looking at, for example, emerging technologies in the long-term care space. I'm not sure that's ever been more pressing, or the imperative has ever been more clear. Similarly, applied research projects across industry to retool, given the expectations, for example, on contact-free manufacturing. So, the Center for Advanced Manufacturing and Design Technologies is available to engage with industry around some of their most pressing needs. And then the third piece is a little more community grounded, but where are there opportunities for partnership? So, whether it's in the creative brainstorming space, through the engagement of our Edge Entrepreneurship Center, how can we provoke thought? How do we kind of spark and bolster innovation and broad scale, either cultural or organizational change? So, those are three pieces of of Sheridan's commitment and its puzzle: what we do in the teaching and learning space, what we do as a research partner, and then in the broad space of community engagement and community service.
As we look forward, and obviously this is, again, you need your crystal ball for this question, but what can people expect to be different in education in the future?
Yeah, this is the $1 million question, right? And I'm conscious. So my expertise, I have 2 teenagers at home, but my area of expertise, I've spent my life researching and supporting students, post-secondary students. That's not, there isn't a stereotypical student in the system, but I'll speak to Sheridan in particular. On the one hand, I think this has been a great, disruption always drives innovation, particularly in a space as open and receptive to change as Sheridan is. So do I think there will be more online learning available? Absolutely. I think the embrace of technology enhanced learning was overdue, and there are a tremendous array of tools that can help facilitate learning in a space that we would describe as universally designed, so that it enhances access for every type of learner regardless of their profile, right? So it can really level the playing field in some ways if we design purposefully technology enhanced learning strategies. But do I think the end of a campus experience or of the engagement-based learning is kind of past? I don't. And in part, that's informed by my ongoing conversations with students. Somebody at dinner last night was just saying what they miss most is standing in the line for a muffin and meeting people that he didn't know before that. And so the compound impact of the pandemic, I think, has really underscored people's insatiable appetite to be connected. And the beauty of a campus environment, for those of us who've had the privilege of experiencing it, is this notion of connectivity around shared purpose. And so I hope we don't lose that while we embrace what this crisis has taught us.
I imagine, the campus experience obviously is much more than sitting in a class. As you said, there's the restaurant services, the arrival of students, the departure of students, the parking, all of that. Where are you in your preparation for the fall semester?
Yeah. So, we're working flat out on that front. One of the things that I remind folks of is that we run childcare services on our campuses, and we run elder care. There are elder care services on our campus. So if we really run pillar to post on the demographics of our community. The majority of our students are 18 to 24, with lots of outliers across the board. And then we are accountable to a faculty and staff cohort that does not fit that age profile. Most of them are not 18 to 24. So in our preparations for reopening, we're trying to calculate risk profiles across our demographics. Also recognizing that we run retail, we run cafeteria services, we have large open and group spaces, entrance and egress is multiple across each of our sites. So the college system in Ontario has developed a plan for reopening that allows for or accounts for regional differences and unique campus circumstances. Our commitment is to get students back on campus as soon as it is safely possible to do so. And we're planning around things like personal protective equipment and physical barriers and physical distancing directives. But in the interim, we will continue to deliver the highest quality learning experiences through alternate delivery, online and otherwise. And we're excited to be starting the spring summer term now, and then looking forward to the fall term. Our programming is ready to roll.
One of the issues that hadn't occurred to me, I think I'm thinking too much in the now and not in the future, is around parents' ability to plan for their education for their kids in the future. Yeah. That's got to create a tremendous amount of stress for young people and their parents. What can you say to them now?
Yeah. So, I have these conversations almost every day with friends and family and prospective parents, prospective students' parents in the Sheridan pipeline. So what I know about transition. So transition is one of the things that I studied as a researcher. What I know about transition is that the most effective driver of positive transition from state A to state B is a sense of purpose. And I think there's lots of purpose to be found in this crisis. And it is a crisis, particularly, I think, for young folks who I think will be marked by this pandemic for the rest of their lives. So where do you find a sense of purpose? We know that the world needs talent. We know that the world needs leadership. We know that change has never been more all-encompassing. And so, my bias cards on the table, this is what post-secondary does at its best, is it positions students to see the future, to understand their personal purpose, and to facilitate a pathway towards that. And so my encouragement to those parents is it absolutely is going to look different, both now and in the fall, but it will be of high quality and it will facilitate a pathway to purpose. And I hope people find some sense of stability and certainty in that assurance.
One of the other things that came up in our conversation last week with the Canadian Chamber economist was around the small and medium-sized enterprise and their ability to plan business continuity, business resilience. And I know that falls right into some of the programming that Sheridan is doing. But many small businesses, that's not something that they're concerned about. They're concerned about revenue, the next customer, how do they pay their bills, those sorts of things. But what role can the post-secondary colleges play in trying to help these SMEs as they look beyond this pandemic to whatever might come next?
Yeah, so, this is one of those spaces where there is an evolving need for talent and for research and for service. So I think there are a number of different ways that Sheridan can positively engage. As we would expect, some of this talent need has been expressed through our professional advisory committees and our programming, for example, in the community safety space, has actually expanded to contemplate enterprise risk and what risk registries now mean. How do we calculate it? How do we monitor it? How do we mitigate it? And so, there's lots of academic discipline-specific curricular content in that space. I also think there's an opportunity to engage with industry and community partners, regardless of the size, in applied research to kind of test risk appetite and resilience. So there's the research space. On the community service space, I just draw folks' attention to EDGE again. Part of the coaching and the support that we provide to both startups and scale-ups is around risk identification, really nailing what your risk appetite is, and then how do you mitigate it? And some of that mitigation, frankly, can be provided through mentorship, certainly through tools, but through mentorship and through referrals and connections to other resources. And so we'd invite folks to engage with us. That's why we're here.
I would imagine that you're having a number of conversations and you're engaging a lot with the provincial government. Can you talk a little bit about that discussion and the planning?
Yeah, so I have to say that the Ministry of Colleges and Universities has been tremendously engaged. We have a minister right now who is very personal in his approach, and so he reaches out to me and other presidents personally via phone and text regularly. And I would just say, for everybody, I live by this kind of model that Sanford articulated years ago around the imperative to balance a challenge with support. And so if you think about these things on opposing axes, growth and progress is expedited when you balance those things appropriately. So the challenge that the sector is facing, you can think about this as an individual, as an organization, or as a community. The challenge has to be balanced by support for outcomes to be achieved. And in this instance, Minister Romano, I think, has been tremendously effective in his personal outreach. All of us together are contemplating, weighing, and balancing. We know that colleges in particular are fundamental to economic recovery and to economic growth. We take tremendous pride in that role. And as a consequence, reopening matters. And we know the timeline for that matters. First and foremost, we're all focused on the safety and the well-being, both physical and mental, the safety and well-being of our communities. And for me, that's 45,000 people. It's their families, it's their friends. I take that accountability very seriously. And I believe the minister does too. And so together, collectively, we're navigating what reopening looks like, what an appropriate timeline looks like, and how we'll measure our success in balancing those two pieces of a very complex puzzle.
We only have a few seconds left, Janet, but I wonder if there's one lesson you could take away from this experience that you could relate to the business community.
Yeah, so what I'd say in closing is, we're all navigating this. I say many times a day, this is, for the first time in my 35-year career, the personal, professional, in our case, academic, but also financial hardship. Like the compound, complex interaction of all of these impacts is so considerable. And I'm so proud of the way that Sheridan continues to navigate this. And my hope for everybody is that you view our progress, the place we're in and the place we need to get to, through the lens of kindness and empathy.
Thanks very much, Janet. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
My guest today has been Dr. Janet Morrison, President and Vice Chancellor at Sheridan College in Oakville. Our next conversation will take place May 27th. That's next Wednesday at noon. And I'll be joined by Dean Stoneley, the President and CEO of Ford Canada. To everyone on Facebook Live, Zoom, and on your TV, thank you for tuning in. Have a productive and safe day.